I didn't see this plaque until I was editing. Carol Ann Leatheran was the Secretary General of the Canadian Olympic Association and a member of the International Olympic Committee. She was born on the 27th of July 1942 and died the 2nd of February 2001 in Toronto, Canada. Carol began her sports career as an archery coach for the University of Toronto in 1963, and she did this until 1970, after which she continued her teaching at York University, remaining at York until 1977. During her time at York, Leatheran was the Vice President of the Canadian Gymnastics Federation. Carol was a judge at the Olympic Games and the Pan American Games throughout the mid-1970s to late 1980s. Apart from judging, Leatheran continued her Olympic work by joining the Canadian Olympic Association in 1981 and was the head of mission of the Canadian team at the 1988 Summer Olympics. On the evening of January 31st, 2001, Leatheran was given a speech at a banquet when she collapsed. 2 days later, she passed away from a brain aneurysm. She was awarded the Canadian Olympic Order in 2001 and inducted into the Canadian Olympic Hall of Fame in 2010. So this is the Toronto Necropolis Cemetery. Dates back to 1850. This cemetery replaced the Strangers' Burying Ground, which was established in 1826. This is one of Toronto's oldest and most historic cemeteries, St James Cemetery being the oldest. So this is another one I missed until I was editing, but Charles Durand was born in 1811. He was a lawyer and an author. He was convicted of complicity for his participation in the 1837 rebellion. He spent many years in exile in the United States and he died on August 16th, 1905. From what I can gather, 1856 relates to his son, Charles Albert Durand, who was removed from York General Burying Ground on the 10th of May 1856 and reinterred at Toronto Necropolis. So I'm pretty sure that this is the final resting place for Anderson Ruffin Abbott. Anderson was born the 7th of April 1837 in Toronto. He died the 29th of December 1913. Anderson was the first black Canadian to be licensed as a doctor. He was born in Toronto and completed his early education in Canada and the States. In 1858, he became a medical student at the Toronto School of Medicine, receiving his medical license in 1861. During the American Civil War, he worked as a civilian surgeon at a hospital in Washington, D.C. and tended wounded soldiers. He later served in other hospitals and became well known. He was actually part of the medical team that tended American President Abraham Lincoln on the night he was shot in 1865. The notes you see now on the screen were taken by Dr. Abbott. Anderson returned to Canada in 1866. In 1874, he was appointed coroner of Kent County in Ontario. He was the first black man to hold that office. In 1894, he became Surgeon-in-Chief at Providence Hospital in Chicago. He returned to Toronto in 1897 and resumed his private life practice. Throughout all of this, he was also active in race relations and fought against racial segregation. Anderson died at home at the age of 76 years old. A very accomplished individual. Now I'm saying this is his grave, his final resting place, but there's no marker. But on Find a Grave, this is a photo of this marker here, but there was another one sort of on the ground there, but that's gone. So I'm assuming that this is his final resting place. Rest in peace, Anderson Abbott. This appears to be the father of Edward Ned Hanlon. It's not Edward Hanlon's grave, because that's in a different part of the cemetery, but I've just come across this one. Pretty cool, huh? Wow. You can see the stairs going down. It's obviously bricked up. This is the final resting place of George A. Romero. He was born 4th of February 1940 in New York. He passed away the 16th of July 2017 in Toronto. George was an American-Canadian filmmaker, writer, editor and actor. Romero graduated from college in 1960 and began shooting short films and TV commercials. One of his commercial films was a segment from Mr. Rogers' Neighbourhood, the one where Fred Rogers underwent a tonsillectomy. The sun's pretty brutal today, so I don't know if you can see clearly. So in the late 60s, he formed Image 10 production company with John Russo and other friends. And this is the company that produced Night of the Living Dead in 1968. now a cult film, of course. George co-wrote it with John Russo and directed the film. George has a massive list of film credits to his name. Dawn of the Dead in 1978, Creepshow in 1982, Creepshow 2 in 1987, Bruiser in 2000, and The Crazies in 2010. There's television shows to his name: The Winners 1973 to 74, O.J. Simpson, Juice on the Loose 1974, Tales from the Dark Side, that was 83 to 88, and Iron City Ass Kickers 1998. He also acted and had parts in films he had written or directed. He played the Washington reporter in Night of the Living Dead. He was an FBI agent in Memphis for the film Silence of the Lambs. Check it out online, he's got a full list of credits. And as I said, he passed away July 16th, 2017 as a result of lung cancer. Rest in peace, George. This is the final resting place for William Lyon Mackenzie. William was born the 12th of March 1795. He passed away August 28th, 1861. Now, William was a Scottish-born Canadian journalist and politician. He was born in Dundee in Scotland, and he emigrated to York, Upper Canada, as it was then, in 1820. William published his first newspaper in 1824. He was elected a York County representative to the Legislative Assembly in 1827. In 1834, York became the city of Toronto, and Mackenzie was chosen as York's first mayor in 1834, but he lost his parliamentary seat in 1836. In 1837, he led an unsuccessful revolt against the Canadian government. He fled to America and started a newspaper called Mackenzie's Gazette in 1838. He was charged by the United States with breaking neutrality laws and went on trial in June of 1839. He was sentenced to prison for 18 months, and after 11 months he was pardoned and allowed to re-enter Canada. In 1849-1850, that was. He later went back into politics. Now, William has been described as having a fiery temper, which is quite evident when you read about him, and he is known as Toronto's rebel mayor. A very interesting character as far as I'm concerned. I've only summarised some of his life, definitely worth reading up about him. He died in 1861 at his home, Mackenzie House in Toronto. That home was given to him by friends and supporters after his retirement from public life. His grandson, William Lyon Mackenzie King, became Canada's 10th longest running Prime Minister. In 1936, he saved Mackenzie House from demolition. 2 of the townhouses either side had already been demolished. The home received heritage status in 1973. The house is considered to be Toronto's most haunted house, but that's a story for another time. William Lyon Mackenzie is York's first mayor, or mayor, however you want to say it. Do you. Rest in peace, William. So this one is going to be very, very difficult to read, but we'll do our best. But in this grave here marked by this monument. At Toronto Necropolis Cemetery are Thornton and Lucy Blackburn. So they are listed as freedom seekers, entrepreneurs, anti-slavery activists and community benefactors. Lucy was born a slave in Kentucky. When she was 28 years old, she was working as a nanny for a family. She was at this time known as Ruthie. Whilst with this slave family, she met Thornton, who at that time was 19 years old. Shortly after, Lucy and Thornton married. Lucy's slave owner died, so Lucy was sold off to another merchant. However, before the merchant could sell her on, Lucy and Thornton both escaped to Detroit. Unfortunately, Thornton was discovered as a fugitive in 1833, and both he and Lucy were arrested and jailed. The story from here states that the emerging black population in Detroit, along with allies of the anti-slavery movement, demanded the release of the pair. Lucy was helped to escape prison, and once out she fled to Canada. Later that year, supporters incited the Blackburn riots, and during the riots, Thornton was sprung from jail, and he and Lucy were reunited in Montreal. They both later relocated to Toronto, where they lived for nearly 50 years. The Blackburns established Toronto's first taxi company. They designed a red and yellow horse-drawn carriage that would hold up to 4 people. With the taxi company and investments, they became quite wealthy. They spent their life devoted to supporting African Canadians and anti-slavery efforts. They participated in community building activities, and Lucy was one of the first to provide money for the building of Little Trinity Church. The couple were childless, never learned to read or write, and were almost forgotten until archaeologists unearthed the site of their former home in 1985. The dig uncovered remnants of the house, a barn and a cellar. And I shall show you some pictures of that area now, or a video of that area. So because of Lucy and Thornton, Upper Canada, as it was then, established its first refugee reception policy, and the Blackburn riots marked Detroit's first racial protest in history. And in 1999, the government of Canada named Lucy and Thornton as persons of national historic significance, rightfully so. And actually good on Canada as well for refusing to extradite them despite insistence from the governor of Michigan. And then right next to them is George Brown. So the Blackburns worked with George Brown on the anti-slavery movement, buried right beside him. That's pretty cool. George Brown, Blackburns. Rest in peace, Lucy and Thornton. And I'm at the grave of George Brown. So George was born the 29th of November 1818. He died the 9th of May 1880. George was a Scottish-born Canadian journalist. He is best known as the founder and editor of the Toronto Globe. At the time, the Toronto Globe was Upper Canada's most influential newspaper, He was also a politician. On the 25th of March 1880, a former Globe employee who had been dismissed from the Globe went into George's office. The two men argued, causing the ex-employee to pull out a gun. George grappled for the gun, and the struggle caused the gun to go off. George was shot in the thigh. That wound was initially deemed minor, however, it later became infected, causing his death on May 9th. Bennett, the former employee, was later charged and hung for the shooting. George's daughters, Margaret and Catherine, were two of the first women to graduate from the University of Toronto. Quite an accomplished family, I'd say. George Brown. Rest in peace. There's George. And Anne Nelson Brown died at Edinburgh, 6th of May 1906. Rest in peace to you both. It's the last day of the air show in Toronto. So it keeps getting quite noisy. So this is the final resting place of Edward Ned Hanlan. Edward was born 12th of July 1855. He passed away 4th of January 1908. Now, Edward was the first Canadian athlete to be world champion in individual event and the first to gain international recognition. So he was brought up on the western peninsula of the Toronto Island, and that place now bears his name and is known as Hanlan Point, or Hanlan's Point. Edward Hanlan, the most renowned oarsman of any age, whose victorious career has no parallel in the annals of sport, born and died in Toronto, July the 12th, 1855, January the 4th, 1908. There he is. He was 5 years old when he rowed across Toronto Bay to the mainland. This actually earned him a mention in the newspaper. He was 16 years old when he entered his first rowing competition in 1873. He won the championship of Toronto Bay. He won many more championships over the years, with his last being in 1880, where he beat Australian world champion rower Edward Trickett on the Thames in London. This win made him Canada's first world sporting champion in an individual event. So during his rowing career he won more than 300 races. He retired from competitions in 1897, and in 1898 he was appointed to the Toronto Harbour Trust and advocated bicycle paths on the island and cycle lanes in the city. He also advocated a new public library and public swimming pools. He lost his seat in 1900 after criticising the city's role in sewage being dumped in the lake and campaigning for the reorganisation of the fire brigade, amongst other things. He was 52 years old when he died of pneumonia. In loving memory of Edward Hanlon, born July 12, 1855, died January 4, 1908. Also his son, Captain Edward Gordon Hanlon, killed in England August 9, 1917, aged 26 years. Crikey. Also Edward Sutherland, beloved son of Edward and Maggie G. Hanlon, died August 15, 1888, in his second year. Oh, that's sad. Yes, very, very sad. He didn't make his second birthday. He was playing with matches, set fire to his clothing, and died as a result of the burns, as you can see from this newspaper clipping I found. Edward Ned Hanlon, accomplished sportsman, a rower. Rest in peace.